Welcome to Character Playbook's celebration of Jewish Heritage and History Month. I am so grateful to the NFL and to the United Way for making this space to have conversations about culture, to ask questions, and to pique curiosity. We know that we have tons of students live with us today across the country, and many more who will be watching this tape. And I am thrilled to be joined by three players who are big players on and off the field from the NFL community, here to discuss Jewish History and Heritage Month. So I'd like to actually start by kicking it over to you, Mark, just to introduce yourself, and then we'll get the conversation started.
Okay, thanks, Hannah, and thanks, NFL United Way, for putting this together, and hello to everyone watching. I'm Mark Wilf. I'm owner and president of the Minnesota Vikings. My wife Jane and I live in New Jersey, but we spend, of course, time in Minnesota. And a little bit about me. I grew up in New Jersey. I'm a child of Holocaust survivors. We love football. We've loved the NFL. And we love being involved in the Jewish community as well. So I'll fill you more about that later, but that's just a little background.
Thank you so much, Mark. And Rob from Character Playbook said to me that the people of Minnesota love it when the Vikings win, but it doesn't really matter so much to them because the Vikings just do so much good work in the Minnesota area and in Minneapolis in particular. So I thought this would be a good occasion to teach our first Jewish vocabulary word for today, which is mensch. And so really thank you, Mark, for letting the Vikings show the rest of the NFL how to mensch. To mensch is to be an uber good person. And my dad said to make sure to mention, but they also care whether or not the Vikings win as well. So thank you so much for being here today. Adam, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, hey guys, thanks for having me and thanks for putting this on. My name is Adam Podlesh. I'm an ex-punter for the Jacksonville Jaguars, Chicago Bears, and with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Originally from upstate New York. I was raised Jewish up there, as a lot of Jews were raised up in the New York area. Went to school at the University of Maryland, which I got my shirt on right at the other side over here, and was drafted down in 2007, played 8 years in the NFL.
Awesome, Adam. Thank you so much. And Greg, just go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right, I am Greg Camarillo, and I actually played for the Vikings and Mark Wilf's team, and I apologize now for not positioning a Vikings helmet right there instead of my Dolphins one. But I am originally from California. My mother is Jewish, my father is Catholic, but I come from a family of Hungarian Jews. So from Budapest, Hungary, my grandfather at the age of 16 hopped on a boat about 100 years ago and came to the United States. I played 8 years in the NFL as a wide receiver for the Chargers, Dolphins, Vikings, and Saints, and am an alum of Stanford University.
Awesome, Greg. Thank you so much. And just to introduce myself, I actually am from the field of education. I spent 10 years as a principal of a middle school in Brownsville, Brooklyn. So the 7th and the 8th graders on the call, middle school is the best. Thank you for being here. And I now work with a team called Teach Like a Champion, studying awesome teachers across the country, and then taking what we learn from you all, the heroes on this call, and paying it forward by training other teachers. So though my professional experience is not Jewish, really everything that I do because of my Jewish identity and through Jewish eyes. And I know that Jewish identity has had a significant, essential influence on all of us who are here today. So thank you all so much for making the time to be here for this conversation. So the point of this conversation for everyone who is listening is to ask lots of questions. Character Playbook does a fantastic job throughout the year of just shining the spotlight on many of the different cultures that make up our vast neighborhood that is the United States. So if you're on this call and you have a question that you've ever wondered of, oh, I wonder why a Jewish person does that, or I wish I knew someone Jewish so I could ask what a matzah ball is. There is no question that is too small. We want your questions. Please go ahead and enter them either in the chat or in the Q&A, and we're going to make sure to make time to answer as many of them as possible today. But before we do that, we have some questions for you to get you warmed up in the poll. These are little Jewish trivia questions to see how much you may already know about the Jewish culture and religion. So the first question is, what is the most important text in the Jewish culture? Is it A, Torah, B, Bible, C, Book of Kel, D, Scrolls of Mesopotamia? And I will let you know that there are arguably 2 correct answers to this question. So we'll give a moment. It says hosts and panelists can't vote. Sorry, guys. But we'll give a moment to see our first set of answers to come in, to see how much our listeners already know about the most important text in Jewish culture and religion. I guess you could really argue there wouldn't be a Jewish. 100% correct. Nice job. It is absolutely the Torah. And the Torah is, of course, the Hebrew word for the Old Testament, which is why Bible could arguably also be a correct answer. Nice job to our highly educated listeners. Our next poll question is, what is the day of rest called in Jewish culture? This one's also a bit tricky. Again, 100% correct. It's called the Sabbath, or in Hebrew, the word is Shabbat. And of course, our Sabbath, unlike the Christian Sabbath, which is on Sunday, our Sabbath, our Shabbat, is on Saturday. Next question. Jews who keep kosher follow a special set of rules about what they can and cannot eat. Which of the following can never be kosher? Much to my husband's dismay. Cucumbers, hummus, pork, or cheese pizza. And again, we've got 100% accuracy. We have a highly educated crowd that's listening. And then this is for those of you who are paying close attention to our first vocabulary word of the day. The Yiddish word mensch most closely means A, teacher, B, deeply good person, C, clown, or D, scuba diver. I thought this was going to be the giveaway, but they've gotten 100% so far. Exactly correct. And thank you again to the Vikings for leading the way in Uber mentioning. So now it's time for us to dive into our conversation. And the first, in honor of Jewish History Month, appropriately, our first question is going to be about the rich and lengthy 3,000 years of Jewish history. Greg, I would love for you to get us started in this conversation. When you think about the breadth and depth of Jewish history, if you had to choose one moment that you wanted others to be aware of, what would you shine the spotlight on and why?
Well, I actually was going for more of a theme over Jewish history than one moment, but it's the ability to overcome adversity. So Jewish people have been persecuted for probably all of those 3,000 years, have been enslaved, have been told they can't practice their religion. And time after time, the Jewish people have persevered and have been able to celebrate not just the religion, but the culture. And it's something I take great pride in, and a lot of Jewish people do, is the fact that there's been so many moments of overcoming adversity and sticking together as a people, believing in your religion, believing in your culture, and then fighting for your freedom to believe in Judaism.
That's beautiful, Greg. Thank you so much for kicking off the conversation. Adam or Mark, do you want to add?
I'll add. I mean, what Greg said about adversity, I'd want everyone to know about Jewish history. Of course, the adversity, the greatest adversity ever in Jewish people's history was the Holocaust. And to learn from that something terrible like that, a genocidal event like that, doesn't just happen by accident. It was incremental, it was intentional. And Jewish people, like my own parents and grandparents, they lived in Poland, and they were in a world where kind of like here, they lived a normal life. They went to school, they had friends, they had relatives, they had neighbors, and it was a normal society. And then over time, gradually, they were delegitimized step by step by step. And I would hope everyone would want to learn more about it, because it's not just important for Jewish history, but it's important for really history of civilization, to make sure that no one discriminates against anyone else, because it can lead to something horrible like that. So that's something that I think all young people should strive to learn about, whatever culture or background they're from, to learn about that, and the fact that that happened to our people. And out of that came, of course, the founding of the State of Israel. And that's all part of a history I think everyone can learn from, no matter what their background.
Thank you so much, Mark. And it's a narrative that is within our lifetime, right? It's my grandfather, who, thank God, is still alive, who's a Holocaust survivor. That's not ancient history. That's history that happens just 60 years ago. And it's so important that we keep that story alive. Adam, anything to add?
Yeah, these guys really did a great job and kind of touched on a lot of points that I was going to touch on too. I guess the one thing kind of relating to the football part of it, and, everybody talks about going through adversity on a football field, and experiencing adversity is, it helps build character. But I think also from a historical standpoint, it's good to learn from past, adversity and hardships that, particularly your culture has gone through. And I think there's a lot that we can learn to be a better person going forward from it, but also not, forgetting what has happened in the past, and for a lot of reasons. And that's something that we can use. And we've got a lot of that history. You can say it unfortunately and fortunately, in a lot of different ways moving forward.
Thank you. Absolutely. I think a common theme in all of our answers is this notion that the adversity has created within the Jewish identity a sense of empathy, that to be Jewish is to empathize with those who are being persecuted. And to your point, Mark, to say this is something that happens incrementally. And so in any position that we see where social justice is being encroached upon, part of being Jewish is saying this has happened to us. This is happening to us in some parts of the world and in some cases. And so it's our job to learn from this history and to speak up. Thank you so much. Moving on to our next question, which is about role models. Adam, if you could kick us off. When we think about role models, we think about people in our lives, in books, in history, in popular culture, who have inspired us to be our best selves. Who was your Jewish role model growing up, Adam? And how did he or she inspire you?
Yeah, I had a lot of, role models, as, a lot of people do growing up. The one that really comes to mind and really kind of touches on, some of the adversity that we talked about in the last question is my grandmother, Betty Podlesh. This is a woman who grew up in 1931. She was born in 1931, kind of coming out of, the Great Depression in Watertown, New York, ahead of her time. She grows up as a Jewish woman in that time and goes to college, graduates, ends up, raising 3 great boys while also, heading many charitable organizations, ends up starting her own business. Starting her own business, a lot of people, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And, she started it up, in her 50s and thrived in a business for 30 years, running it through her 80s. And she's now 90 years young and living.
Can I know her? That's amazing.
I can't say how ambitious, and somebody who just takes control of things and looks at adversity and says, I'm going to overcome it. And that's a perfect example, every step of the way that she's done.
Wait, what's her business?
It was called Knit and Pearl. It was a yarn and knitting shop. And she was, not to go into a side, she was actually on Knit Vogue, if there was like a magazine for that, which is crazy enough. But yeah, she ended up, it was very successfully run. Yeah.
This is the coolest in the world. I hope that your grandma, I don't know if you called her Bubby, is watching now and is getting appropriate nachas from this shout out. Thank you for being our role model. Thank you for sharing that. Mark, I know you had a role model you wanted to talk about as well.
Yeah, my grandmother as well. She had a different experience, of course, than what you just heard. But we call her our Babu, Miriam, and she was, as I said before, survived the Holocaust. And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here today, and none of us would be alive, because she really saved and rescued our family. She was one of 180,000 Jewish people in Lvov, Poland. And out of that 180,000 Jews, she and her husband, my grandfather, my mother, and my uncle were part of a handful to survive out of that 180,000. She had lived in the Lvov, Poland. It was a big city. She was forced into a ghetto, and she escaped that ghetto. She had papers, working papers that said she was Christian, so she could escape the ghetto. And she worked on a farm for 2.5 years in German territory, always worrying every day whether she would live to the next day. My grandfather did not have those work papers, so she had to hide my grandfather under the floorboards of a barn for 2.5 years. So every day was a harrowing, horrible, nightmarish experience, never knowing that they'd live to the next day. And the reason she's a hero to me was, despite all the trauma, despite the adversity, tremendous adversity, she survived, and she came to the United States, built a life around a love of Judaism, a love of Israel, and a love of family. And with hard work and with perseverance, our family marched on and went on. And here we are today. And right now, to be part of this call, even to be part of the NFL and the greatest sports enterprise in the world. And it's just an incredible journey. And just her example is a role model and hero to me forever. So I talk about her all the time and always in my heart. She lived to 97, passed away about 20 years ago, but always in our heart and always an example and aspiration for us.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Zichrona livracha. Clearly, her memory is for a blessing, even just in sharing her story with us now. Thank you so much for that. My dad teaches that when you say the prayer for the dead, la'ela ula'ela, that their soul gets higher. So I hope that Babu Miriam's nefesh, that she's watching over you and not just like pushed her up a little higher, for sharing that story. Thank you. Greg, any role models you want to talk about?
Yeah, and in the same type of theme, I'm rolling with a grandparent.
Love it.
My grandfather, Philip Garb, who my middle name is Philip, so I'm named after him. I never got to meet him. He passed away before I was born, but similar to the stories we just heard, a story of building a life for yourself. So he came to the United States at the age of 16 to New York and had to figure out how to build a life. And he became a tailor. So similar to Adam's story of his grandma learning to creating a knitting business, I believe a lot of Jewish people got into tailoring, knitting, sewing, the garment industry. And from there created a career, went on to work for the union of tailor workers, moved to Los Angeles, created a strong family life, allowing my mom and her siblings to go to college, become educated, and really build a solid foundation for the future, who turned out to be me. So I, like we all, forever grateful for the hard work and sacrifice that our grandparents put in to allow us to have a good life.
That's so awesome. I feel so grateful to have heard those stories. Thank you so much for sharing them, gentlemen. And just also how I think it speaks to one of the values of Judaism, which is valuing our stories and valuing our family, right? That seeing in our grandparents, they're not just who they are right now, they're the story that they carry with them and that they teach us and that we get to teach to our children and to all the kids and students who are listening on this call. So thank you so much for those beautiful answers. We're going to switch now to holidays. We have a variety of fabulous Jewish holidays to choose from. If you are going to choose your favorite Jewish holiday, which would it be and why is it at the top of your list? And Mark, why don't you kick us off for this?
Well, I'm glad for the question because I know we talked about a lot of adversity, some heavy themes here, but this is something, a lot of Jewish life is fun. It's spiritual. For me, it's Passover. It happens to be the number one observed holiday for Jewish people, more than Yom Kippur, even as far as observing having the Seder. So I love the Seder meal. It's about family. It's about food. And I think it's universal, the messaging. It's about going from slavery to freedom, about storytelling. So it's always something we look forward to. Not a big fan of the matzahs, but the Passover and the family and all the things I mentioned makes it my number one.
Despite the matzah, same. I strongly agree with you, Mark. I'm 100% there with you.
That's good. That's good.
Oh no, it's despite the gefilte fish for me too. Not so much. Greg, how about you? Favorite holiday?
I'm going with Hanukkah because I grew up in a majority Christian area. So I had one other student in my middle school that was Jewish, and it stuck with me as a kid that I got to celebrate 8 days of a celebration while. And I also celebrated Christmas. So I came from a mixed religious household. So I celebrated both. But as a kid, I thought it was just awesome that I got to celebrate 8 days of Hanukkah and 1 day of Christmas. But my family was not very traditional in the way we did it. So there was a lot of singing, a lot of dancing, some present opening. It was a very festive time in the Camarillo household. So Hanukkah is my favorite.
That sounds tremendous. Wait, can you tell us what's one of the unusual traditions, like the singing or the dancing, or what made your celebration a bit special?
The way we dance, it's nuts. It looks terrible, but it's fun. Something I will never take a video of and post, but it brings out the fun in everyone.
So that means if we weren't on Zoom, we'd all be invited over, right? That's
exactly.
What you're saying.
There you go.
It's too bad that we're on Zoom. Thanks. Adam, what about you? Favorite holiday?
Yeah, mine's Passover along with Mark's. A few reasons why, kind of one, the stories, great to, talking about bondage and slavery and persevering and everything that goes along with that story. I think, I've always kind of used in one way, shape or form in growing up, but also just from a family standpoint, one thing that was great, we had, some of our family that was out of town for some of the other high holy days weren't able to make it for those, but Passover was always one of those holidays where, everybody was able to, for whatever reason, come into town. Also up in New York, it's springtime. We're kind of looking forward to, kind of some better weather moving forward, and, maybe playing some tag football out in my grandma Betty's front yard. And then we would all watch the 10 Commandments. And it's funny, every single year, my mom will text me when the 10 Commandments are on during Passover. She'll just send me a message. The 10 Commandments are on every single year, like clockwork. But yeah, that always kind of has a spot in my heart, that the holiday, maybe a little bit more so than the other ones.
I love that. I have two kids who are 7 and 9, and though we don't watch the 10 Commandments, we do watch Prince of Egypt, right? Because there's something about the Passover narrative that is so compelling that it creates great art in addition to being a really powerful story to tell at the Seder. Thank you guys so much for those answers. We're going to switch now to talk about Jewish values. And when I think about really every choice that I make every day, I am so grateful that I have a Jewish education to draw on to help ground me in my values. And I know that you on this call feel similarly. So Mark, if you don't mind kicking us off, talk to us about, when you think about Jewish values, what are the most important to you and how have they guided your life choices?
Well, there's so many values in the religion and in our culture, but for me, what's shaped my life has been the value of responsibility. There's an expression, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. All Jews are responsible for each other. And for my parents and grandparents, they passed down to me that sense of responsibility for ensuring a vibrant Jewish future, a better world for society. And now my wife, Jane, and I are transmitting that to our kids. So every decision I have made about leadership and about giving back is influenced by that value. So in high school, I was fortunate to lead, community fundraising for our teen division. And even today, I'm privileged to chair the Jewish Federations of North America, which is a volunteer position, but it's organized around Jewish community life. And the federations are 146 communities around the United States and Canada. And it's about educating, about taking care of our seniors. It's about taking care of people that are less fortunate. It's about connecting with Israel and also connecting with communities all over the country. So it's something that really guides me, and it's a value that I really, really find so important.
Mark, thank you so much. Adam, Greg?
I guess I can jump in. Kind of along with that, the teachings and things that I think about when it comes to the Jewish culture, is, not, I guess you can't be responsible without being steadfast or having conviction in your ideals, and that's kind of the one thing that I've always taken, it's very easy to have, an ideology when things are when you don't have adversity, but when you do have adversity, that's when it's most difficult to continue to have, your responsibility and your ideals. It's a lot harder to keep those, and having the conviction and continuing and being steadfast in what your is important. And that's kind of one of the things that I, try to live by and use that as a tool.
Beautiful, beautiful. So we have communal continuity, and then continuity generation to generation, sticking with the values is beautiful. Greg?
Going to kind of wrap all those together. So Mark talked about family and community, and previously we talked about empathy and justice, and bringing all those together to, of a history of Judaism to present day. And that is, being a good neighbor, being a good member of a community, being a good member of a family, and fighting for that justice. And particularly in our country today, we see a lot of injustice going on. And so I believe that part of the Jewish culture is standing up for that. Like Mark mentioned, that this is not something that just suddenly happens and then there's injustices. It's something that builds up. And part of my culture, my responsibility is acknowledging those and finding ways to correct them and fighting for justice.
Greg, thank you so much for pivoting the conversation in that direction. I consider myself to be so lucky to live at a time in our history where we watch the country work really hard to undo some of the racist structures that do result in injustice across the country. And I make choices every day, all the time, as much as I possibly can, as I know the three of you do as well, to be a part of undoing that racism and those injustices that exist across the world. And I do it because I'm Jewish. I do it because I have learned to empathize. I do it because I have learned about the importance of tikkun olam, of leaving the world better than we have found it. So when we think about our Jewish identities, Adam and Mark, to build on where Greg started, and we think about this unique moment that we are in history, where please God will continue to push forward towards really a more equitable world. So how do you think about the intersection of your Jewish identity and your responsibility and approach to our movement towards justice, parity, and equity in the United States?
If I can take it, I mean, this is something that's always very important. I think the NFL is a great platform to really help make a difference in that regard. I mean, it's a big issue. George Floyd, for instance, was murdered just about less than a mile from our stadium. So it's been very much on our minds, as it is on all of us. How can we make a better world? How can our young people have a better experience? We try to use that intersection. We for instance, we bring young people from Minnesota. We brought them to Washington. We brought them to the African American Museum as well as the Holocaust Museum. I think it's about education. It's about sharing our stories. We have a social justice committee on our team. Great people like Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr and others, Amir Abdullah, that we've gone to Washington. I've talked about the experiences that my family went through, but also it's about listening. So everyone who's listening to the Zoom, hopefully they will listen to their friends, hear how they grew up, talk about what you went through. And if we can better understand each other, we have to get to a point where discrimination of any kind is totally unacceptable. So that's how this plays out. The NFL, we're just a microcosm. Our locker rooms, we have people from all walks of life that are in that locker room. The other guys here know it better than I do, what that's about. And it's something very special. And I think it can be an example that we have to share each other's stories, talk to each other, listen to each other, and strive for a better tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Mark. And that's so in the spirit of Character Playbook as well, right? This notion that we are all different and we're going to celebrate those differences. And to your point, learn from them and make sure that we are able to identify even unintentional discrimination and move beyond that to work together. Thank you. Adam.
Sorry, I was muted there. I would say, kind of going along with what Mr. Wilf said, part of, if you look back in the history of Jewish history, it's been implanted in so many different cultures, going from one continent to the other, and seeing other people, the way that they live, experiencing other people the way they live. I grew up in upstate New York, and I was in one fairly homogeneous area, and then moving on to an area in Maryland and being involved in NFL locker rooms where there's people from all over the country and in different, from different countries even. And then, moving into the South, Midwest, being around different cultures, I think is, one of the most important things in understanding, where people come from. I think that is the best way that we can end up becoming more accepting of and moving the process to, kind of more understanding, quicker. If we shut ourselves off from how people live, I feel that only hinders us being able to move this movement forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Adam. And it's a nice segue to our next question, which is to think about, there's a moment, I don't know if it's in childhood or in young adulthood, where you start to realize that the categories that you're a part of help define your identity. And you're like, oh, my category, whether it's my religion or my culture or the color of my skin, isn't like everyone else's. And we were wondering if there was a moment in any of your childhoods or early adulthoods where you realized like, oh, this is what being Jewish means. And it means being different in this way. And if you wouldn't mind sharing that moment when you had that realization. Greg, you're off mute. So, go for it.
And it diverges a little bit from the theme of Judaism, what we're talking about. But I noticed I was different because I only had one other person in middle school that was celebrating Jewish holidays. But mine, I come from, I have a Jewish Hungarian mother and a Mexican Catholic father. And in fourth grade, when you start doing standardized testing, you fill out the bubble. So I fill in my name, and then it asks for your race and ethnicity. And it says white, Hispanic, not white, and then some other categories. And I fit both of those. And I did not know. And it said check 1. And so at that moment, I realized that my heritage of coming from a mixed race, mixed religion family was different. And I was being forced to pick one. But what it did is it sparked an interest of trying to figure out who I am, learning where I come from, and eventually led to the pride in being unique.
I love that story so much, Greg, because I know, having just come out of a middle school myself, that kids are still forced to choose bubbles, right? And that we know that identities are so much more than that. And so I love that you shared this story as the catalyst for you to say, I don't fit in the bubble, and that's awesome. And I'm going to learn more about that and who I want that to be. Thank you so much for kicking it off with that share. Adam, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, growing up as a kid, I would say there was a lot of acceptance, almost to the point where it was a non-issue. Oddly enough, maybe it's just because there were a lot of, Jews who lived in my area. But I do remember in first grade having a conversation with one of my friends, and we were just confused because he was talking about, Jesus, and we kind of had different thoughts. And I was like, whoa, okay, well, I guess this is not everybody thinks the same or, believes the same thing. And that was kind of my first aha moment. That was like, that it's, people are different. And then you kind of fast forward, actually looking at, locker rooms, really, fast forwarding to, the Jaguars locker room. I was the first Jew that a lot of people had even met, and kind of seeing not just that people were different, which I knew and believed different things as a kid, but also that, that there was people who just hadn't experienced being in a different culture, or meeting people of different cultures. Like, for example, like a Jewish culture where they might not have met anybody like that before. And that was kind of new to me, being the person to help them be, help, I guess, expand their cultural horizons, so to speak. And, almost like, wow, I didn't know that was actually a thing. And, just, kind of an interesting tidbit outside of, like the youngster moment.
It totally is. And it's such a gift to be able to see the benefits of it on both sides, to be like, oh, I don't know about that. Will you teach me? And also to be like, oh, you wouldn't know about me. Let me teach you. Like, amazing to be able to experience it from both perspectives. Mark?
Yeah, for me, I was blessed where I did not feel a sense of otherness. Grew up around a community that had a lot of Jewish people, and my parents maybe were protective of that. And so it came much later, I'd say young adulthood. I pushed my dad. We went back to his roots, to Russia and Poland. And I'll never forget, I went back to Lvov, Poland. I was 23, 24 at the time. And I remember going back to the apartment my mother grew up in. She wouldn't go back there. And I remember people living in those apartments in the 80s looked at us like we were ghosts. They assumed that we were murdered and killed like the rest. And when we came back and they said, okay, you're coming from America and you're Jewish and they couldn't believe we're alive. And that's when I realized the experience my family had made us certainly unique and different. And just to realize how precious life is, and the fact that we were blessed that the United States, and they were able to immigrate to this country, and they were able to be in the melting pot and be part of it. And that's the great promise of this country that we have to continue to strive for. So that's my story.
That's extraordinary, to go back and to stand there and to know that that's where your mother was as a child, and then to talk to people who, they may not have been her actual neighbors, but were from the community.
They were her actual neighbors. They were still there.
Wow. Well, that's a whole other call. You'll tell us about that on part 2 of the call. Amazing. One more question. As we think about, we know Character Playbook was created with this idea of hopefully sparking interest in all of the listeners in learning more about other cultures. And Rob from Character Playbook prepped me for this call, for this part of it. And he asked me to think of a story that could get us all thinking around, like, how if you're a student who lives in an area where people are mostly the same, time, or if you're a student who only knows 2 or 3 other cultures, how can you start to sort of branch out and be able to learn about other cultures and be able to ask the questions, and both to come into a locker room where you're the only Jewish person, or come into a locker room where you're the only person who is both going to click white and Hispanic and non-white, right? And to share that identity, and also to ask the questions. So who has a bit of advice or a challenge to kick us off with? Greg, you're off mute again, so I'm going to make you keep starting as long as you're unmuted.
All right. Well, a few different ways. One is to actively seek out those relationships. So don't shy away from someone that may not look like you or act like you, or just you think might be different with you. Embrace that. And as long as you approach that person in a respectful manner, it is totally fine to ask about their culture. Don't just barge into their life, but you can ask, well, what holidays do you celebrate? What does that holiday mean? What type of food do you eat during it? Totally fine questions to ask. And that's one way to learn. And if you're not comfortable doing that, we all have access to millions of videos online. Pull up a video about a different culture, pull up a video about a different religion, and just see what it's about. Because when you build that basic understanding, you're going to be more accepting of other people. It's not going to be that person's weird and different. That person is cool and different. And then you can learn from those differences and give you a better view of what's going on in the world.
Greg, that is so awesome. I live across, I just followed that advice inadvertently. I live across the street from a Palestinian community center, and they just celebrated Eid al-Fitr. Hopefully I'm saying it right. And I didn't know how to say, particularly right now, I didn't know if I would be well received if I walked over, although we're very good neighbors, to wish them an Eid Mubarak. And I didn't know how to say Eid Mubarak. And I walked over and I said, I think it's your holiday. How do you say happy holiday? And they couldn't have been more welcoming in that moment and in sharing the holiday. And so I think that even if you're a bit shy at first, because this is what I coached myself on last week, taking that moment and saying, I'm going to go over and make the positive connection and ask the question. To your point, Greg, people are going to answer with a smile. Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, I always think that, part of it is, there's not everybody's built the same way. Some people are more extroverted. Some people are more introverted. Some people, it's a little bit more difficult to just, start up a conversation with somebody. But I think, 2 things. One, just being active in your community, being active in different things, whether it's through sports, it could be through a lot of different things, and you're going to meet a lot of different people the more that you do that, whether you're starting the conversations or they are. You're putting yourself in the mix where you're learning about different people, and a lot of these different people have different cultures, and that kind of leads into the second thing, which is, just living out of your comfort zone and trying to push it. You don't have to go crazy, but just doing something that might feel a little like, oh, this might be a little out of my comfort zone, but pushing yourself a little bit more in that arena or in different things, whether it be, I'm not sure about doing this activity, or I'm not sure about getting on stage because I'm not sure if that's, but maybe it's something that you like. You'll learn some new things, and you'll also learn a lot of things from new people who you meet.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. And Mark, close us out.
Well, I think both of those answers are right on point, to be respectfully learning about others and to be part of the community. The bottom line is to be endlessly curious, to view life as a journey, and really to read, the internet, for instance. We talk about all the ills of internet and social media, but the amount of knowledge that is real out there that you can learn. If there's something you're curious about, go down that path. Take education as a gift and learn about other people, about other things going on in your community, and really just enjoy the life journey to really learn from others and to listen. Listen is another huge tool, and I don't think we do enough listening, and hopefully that's part of what that ties into what's been said before too.
That's beautiful. Mark, thank you. In our last 60 seconds together, gentlemen, something that I think we all of humanity share a healthy curiosity about is food. So if you could reach through the screen and serve the students on the other side one savory, sweet item of Jewish cuisine, what would you serve them? Mark, kick us off.
Well, I don't think there's a contest here. I'm going with apricot hamantashen. So that's the holiday of Purim. There was the bad guy was Haman. He had a 3-cornered hat. So this is a 3-cornered dough cookie filled with apricot. That's the way to go. Don't let anyone tell you about any other flavor. That's my favorite.
My daughter doesn't even know why they make other flavors. This poppy seed, she's like, what is this? Apricot all the way. Adam, what's yours?
Hands down, my father's potato latkes are amazing. He says it's all in the onions. He always puts in like twice the amount, so we all have bad breath after we're done eating them. But they are so they're so great. That would be it.
Sour cream or applesauce?
Oh, sour cream.
I think that's the correct answer. And Greg.
All right, I got to throw two out there. And one, if anyone's ever feeling sick, my mom's matzo ball soup is like a cure-all for any illness. It is not scientifically proven, but I have evidence that it made me healthy as a child.
It's proven. They're proven.
There
are studies on chicken soup. You're good.
And then my mom, coming from Hungary, these Hungarian meatballs that are peppers with ground beef and onions and rice and everything inside, stuffed in there. Delicious.
Oh, that is amazing. I wish to all of our listeners that we could invite you over and serve you beautiful feasts, but keep tasting, keep asking questions. And thank you so much for tuning in to this hour of Learning with Character Playbook. A huge thank you to each one of our guests. This was fascinating and really meaningful to me to listen to your stories. So thank you so much for sharing them. And biggest thank you to NFL and United Way for creating this space for curiosity, this space for learning, and this space where we get to be the kid in the locker room who's sharing what's important to us. So thank you all so much. And that's it. Over and out.